Hello Reshifters, Cinema4D 2023.1.0 introduces Pyro. Pyro is a simulation framework which allows you to have very fast feedback in the viewport. Okay, for rendering though, you need at least to export it, if not cache it. I'm going to show you in a second how to do all this. Okay, so we're starting with this simple ball. It's moving, nothing spectacular about it. And yes, you can have motion blur. So I've enabled motion blur, and everything else is by default. 5 steps for deformation and transformation is fine, although I have no deformation in the scene. Okay. Next, we're gonna add a simulation Pyro tag. This creates a Pyro object. Now think about this as the simulation settings for the scene. You can only have one Pyro object in the scene, but you can have multiple tags and multiple objects. Of course, you can have only one tag per object because otherwise it's useless to have multiple tags. Okay, so I'm gonna change the sim a bit here. Pyro should be one voxel. Otherwise, if this is 5, for instance, it will be a very low res sim. Okay, because the sphere is really small. It's 10 centimeters. It's not 100. Okay, at 100 you might see things different. So this is really kind of low res. So I'm gonna put this to 1. Let's have a look. This takes a bit longer, and you're gonna notice that this Pyro sim uses VRAM. So if you're trying to run the Pyro sim at the same time with the render, you might run out of VRAM in no time. Also, if this is really, let's say, slow because you're gonna compute a smaller voxel, this will take a lot of VRAM as well. So try to do your sim before rendering, okay? And the way it works is you have to cache your sim. I'm gonna show you in a second what happens. So at this point, I'm at 0.5 here, and let's put 0.5 as well to be on the same side on the tag and the Pyro object. And this is what we're getting, which is okay, no complaints whatsoever. The thing is, can I have the same thing in Redshift? As you can see right now, no. As I said, you need to cache this. But before caching it, we need to assign a material to the Pyro object, not the sphere. Okay, so we're gonna create Redshift materials. We have a new option here, Pyro volume. These are just presets, okay? Volume and Pyro volume, they're exactly the same thing. The only difference is the Pyro volume has the scattering and emission pre-filled as strings. So you can see here, this has been filled and this has been filled with the data coming from the Pyro object. And you can see here, we're using density, temperature, and velocity. And by the way, have on export and off. This is for viewport, this is for rendering, and this is for disabling it. Okay, so at this point, we're only computing velocity, temperature, and density. And if you're exporting this, well, exporting is if you're assigning the material to the Pyro object, you're not gonna get any render. As I said, you need caching. Okay, so we can do that in 2 ways. We can do that interactively like this, which is the easier way out, but the wrong way, because if you're trying to render this on several machines, that might be a problem. At this point, this will indeed render. Okay, but it looks a bit different, which is okay. The main issue here is that if you're trying to render and scrub the timeline at the same time, Redshift will reserve some VRAM. Pyro is using some VRAM. They're going to fight each other, and you're going to end up with no VRAM in no time. So you're not going to be able to either render or sim. So the right way to do this is to leave this on export, okay, because you don't want to consume VRAM with this, and cache it. I'm going to cache the scene. I'm going to call it fire. it will create a vol subfolder with the Fire VDBs, and this is nice because you can use it in other 3D apps if you want, and you can also load it as a volume object in Redshift, but it's more convenient like this, right? So at this point, I can scrub my timeline, hey, and I can also do this off, 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 so there's no computing of the actual Pyro sim. Okay, and let's render this. Okay, well, it looks a bit different from the viewport, right? And the reason for this is that the ranges of these things are a bit different. So you can see here for the alpha, it's extremely transparent. We need a bit more opacity, so we need more absorption. Let's try 100, which seems to be fine. I'm fine with this value. It depends on your sim, okay? But with this so much absorbing, you need also a bit more scattering. So let's try 20. I don't know if I want to see too much smoke, let's say. What you see here, it's coming, the light, it's coming from the dome light, which has volume contribution on, otherwise you don't see it, okay? Luckily for us, we have volume contribution on for all the lights. Okay, so let's go back to this. I think 50 is too much. Let's keep something like 20. And of course, we need a way more temperature, right? So let's try something like this, 10, even more. And you can play at this point, you can play with temperature and offset. Before 3510, I think we had this on color ramp, which uses this ramp, right? Well, that's okay, but not great. Okay, it gives you this, then you have to play with the values, and then it's cumbersome. Okay, way easier, black body, everything falls into place. Now you can play with two things: the temperature, if you want this to be a bit more, let's say, orangey, and the offset. The offset will show more or less data. It kind of moves the data around from high to low. And I like to lower it a bit so I can see a bit more in here, right? Now, you might want also to play with the emission max, something like, I don't know, 3, 4, something like that, and then increase the scale. And what you see here, this red comes actually from this guy and from the offset. So we have to balance these properly, right? There is no rule that this has to be a certain temperature or anything, or that this has to be a certain value. No. And if you're trying to play with the old min, you're gonna actually clamp the emission data. Okay, now you can of course play with this one as well if you want, but that should be fine. I think we'll leave this at 1 and let's go with it as it is right now. Okay, now the scene has motion blur enabled. I can disable this, and I can do one little thing that might be looking wrong. I'm gonna offset the Pyro sim. At this point, this is cached. I can use it as any other object. Okay, and if I open the Redshift render view, I should see this. Now, this is without motion blur. You can see motion blur is disabled, right? If we enable motion blur, let's see if you guys spot any difference between these two. As you can see, they're kind of identical. So what you need to do is to add a Redshift object tag to the Pyro and specify here velocity. Okay, and let's see if we get anything. not much, right? So you might want to increase this by the FPS, let's say. I'm having 30 FPS by default. So let's wait for this to render. There you go. And you have motion blur, okay, coming from velocity. Because without velocity, you're gonna get back to, well, no motion blur. So you need to specify it. Well, that's it. And by the way, if you want to render your object without motion blur, right? Let's say for a second something very, very stupid. I'm gonna animate the Pyro object as well. Might sound crazy, but why not? Let's be crazy. So I've animated this like so. This is cached, remember, right? So at this point, this has global settings, which means transformation and deformation. So even if you have nothing here and you're trying to render this, because you have transformation blur coming from here, you're still gonna motion blur this, right? Especially if you, let's say you've done your sim and you decided to parent this to a moving object, right? So you can, for instance, disable this, and then you're not gonna have any velocity. This is not computing volume velocity, it's computing transformation velocity, okay? If you have this, and this is disabled, you're still gonna compute the volume velocity. You're gonna see that in a second. There you go. This is motion blur coming from the volume sim, okay? While this is combining both the volume sim and the transformation velocity, transformation motion blur. Wait for a second. Okay, you can see the difference. So this is how it works. And as always, if you have any questions, just shoot them on the forum. We're there to help you. Have a precious day. Cheers.